Hello, everyone, and welcome to AXSChat. Today, we are featuring a good friend of mine, Karl Groves, the CEO and founder of Tenon. And you're going to learn a lot more about Tenon. And if you don't know about it, you're going to be excited about this conversation. Neil has decided to go on vacation, and so he's not going to join us, but that's okay. And Antonio, before we start the show, we are very excited because we are now AXSChat, the award-winning chat. And we just want to take just a minute and let Antonio just tell you about the award. If you don't mind, Karl, we're going to do just a little quick
definitely.
yay to our community for this award. So do you mind showing the award again, Antonio, and just tell us just for a couple of minutes about the award?
Okay, Deborah, I'm going to be really fast. So this is the award that we got in a digital transformation event in Europe. We won for the best campaign. And if you want to know more, just go to Twitter. So today we have Karl, so let's move back to that conversation.
Yes, but I will say
Congratulations on the award.
Oh, thank you, Karl. And one, we're so excited about the award for a lot of reasons, but one reason is this was a digital transformation conference. This was not an accessibility or disability inclusion conversation. This is about digital transformation, and to win the top award of, the digital campaign that has social impact when we're talking about accessibility, disability inclusion is a win for our community. So we're really excited, and we were excited that Antonio was there live to pick it up. But okay, so let's talk about you, Karl. And Antonio and I will go back and forth asking you questions. But so as we start, Karl, you, and this is just my opinion, are a legend in our industry. You have been doing accessibility for many years. You have worked for a lot of the US-based accessibility companies, the biggest ones. So if you could just tell the audience a little bit about who Karl Groves is, the history, where you came from, and why you created and founded Tenon.
Sure. So I started out as a web developer, actually, and I got into accessibility. I actually tell this story at one of my presentations that I've done, and it's listed on my website for Open Webcamp. But I got into this because I was a web developer, and I actually decided to switch careers into web development right after Section 508 started becoming enforced. So, Section 508 came out in 1998. And there was that 2-year grace period, 2000. Well, that happened to coincide with me transitioning into web development, and being in the DC area, it actually prevented me from getting a job because people would be like, they'd run your stuff through Bobby or something, and then they'd be like, no, sorry. So I got really angry about that, and I decided to be, if this is going to keep me from getting hired, I'm going to become obsessed with this stuff. So that's how I got into accessibility. And then I got sort of, for lack of a better word, poached by a supplier, a vendor. There was a usability company out of Ashburn, Virginia, called User-Centered Design. I got hired by a guy named Bill Killam. He runs User-Centered Design, great guy, to do web development. And obviously my knowledge of accessibility helped that, because lots of his customers were federal agencies or contractors for federal agencies. So that was really cool, and I loved it. I loved doing accessibility. It was really exciting to me because I felt like the quality of my work could impact real people. I felt like usability is cool and all, but it's really designery, kind of squishy, really hard to sort of track down the exact impact. And I know lots of usability people are going to get mad at me for saying that, but with accessibility, the quality of my code mattered, and I could point to real people. So after working with Bill for a number of years, I decided I just wanted to do accessibility full time. So I worked for SSB Bark Group for about 5 years. I worked on the AMP platform. I did lots of stuff. I redesigned AMP once. I'm not a great designer, so we trashed that later on and hired a design firm. So I worked there. I did the training there, and that led me to a transition over to DQ because Preeti made me an offer that I couldn't refuse, which was training, and I really like to do training a lot. So that was great. I was like, yeah, I really want to do more training stuff. Preeti was like, that's great because we need training. So I did a lot of that stuff there. And then I switched over to Simply Accessible, worked for them, and they've since been bought by SSB, which is now Level Access. But worked with Derek for a while there, and then I decided I wanted to go out on my own, and instead I decided to work with Mike Paziello, because when I reached out to him, he was like, so then I worked for Mike for about 5 years, and in that time period, especially when I started working for Mike, I said, look, I have this idea of this thing I want to make called Tenon. And actually, it wasn't called Tenon at the time, but it became Tenon. And it was, an API first based accessibility testing product. Because during my time period with SSB, with DQ, what I noticed was a lot of people were doing their accessibility testing way too late. If you imagine for a moment, back in the days, especially before DQ had AX, but when they had World Space, SSB had AMP. High software was still high software, and they had compliance sheriff. And one of the problems was it wasn't necessarily those products per se, but the customers would always employ those products really late in the development lifecycle. So if you think for a moment about when people would use those, they would use those after a system was deployed, right? Or at the very least in a development environment, because of the fact that they had a product deployed to a web server and all that sort of stuff. And so Tenon was meant to address that much earlier in the process. With an API, we can now plug that into our IDE. We can plug that into our unit testing, our functional testing. And we can plug that into our content management systems. We can prevent content from going out live because we've tested it much earlier. And so Mike was really supportive of that. He was really great to work for, because he was so supportive of that and wasn't sort of wanting to say, hey, this has to be a TPG thing. He was super cool. And after a while, it got to the point where Tenon was growing so quick that I had to make a choice. And so I decided in 2016 to go out on my own, and then the rest is history.
And I know that Antonio has a question, but let me just, for anybody that's listening that might not be familiar with some of these terminologies, AMP, API that, for example, Karl's using, what we're talking about here are accessibility tools. And this is something that we know, we asked, often in the United States in early days, to test something for accessibility. It's a very manual process, which is very difficult for these large, gigantic technology systems that have all these objects and everything going. And so we know that we need technological solutions along with user testing. I mean, and so we are talking about this from the perspective of tools. And one thing, I'm going to turn the floor over to Antonio, but one thing I want you to address after, maybe along with Antonio's question, is there's so many different accessibility tools out there. It's very confusing, the different ones. And I know you know a lot about these tools. So Antonio, let me turn it over to you, but Karl, keep that in mind, and maybe you could answer both of them at the same time. Go ahead, Antonio.
Thank you, Deborah. No, and going back to Karl's story on accessibility, and knowing that at the moment that you have done, probably have trained hundreds of people out there on the topic of accessibility. Sometimes one thing is you are in the room training people or on a webinar, and you are in that relationship between the trainer and the trainee. But sometimes you might have moments when you are relaxing with them, having a cup of coffee. That type of network moments. That's my question is more about those moments. So when you are having those moments and engage with them, talking about accessibility, what they do, they might ask you questions. What are the things that people still are still surprised at in relation to accessibility? Is they during your training sessions they get surprised, they realize, oh, I'm missing this. What is after so many years of having accessibility in technology and web development, what are the things that people are still there questioning?
You know, that part of it is technical and part of it is political. And so, you know, as you were saying, sort of after the training event, a lot of the conversation is, how do I get other people to care about this? And it's unfortunate that that's still the topic. That's still the biggest question that people have. Like, I feel like a lot of people are okay dealing with the technical, you know, or at least learning about the technical. That stuff seems easy to grasp. The political thing, like how do I get other people to give a damn, is the one thing that I get those questions off the record or outside of the training room. I still get those. But during the training, I think one of the biggest things that people don't seem to understand really is how assistive technology works. It's sort of a black box to people, even to people who have used assistive technologies in testing. They don't really understand the communication between the browser, the accessibility APIs, and the assistive technology itself. And because of that, they get themselves into situations where they either overthink the issue of accessibility, or they don't fully think through the challenges and also the ways that the ways that these things work together in a way that creates that user experience that they work with. So they don't understand sort of a lot of the complex interplays between objects in the browser, the way that the methods and properties of those objects are communicated through the assistive technologies and all that sort of stuff. And so there's lots of unfortunate misunderstandings there. So when I do training, I actually focus more on thinking about accessibility in a way that should help them answer those questions themselves through experience. So if we're thinking specifically about what I call, what is this thing and what does it do, is the big mantra that I say throughout all of my presentations and all of my training. What is this thing and what does it do? Because, and when I say that, I mean like an object on the screen. Let's say something super simple like a button. And I want them to think through, what is a button? What happens when the user clicks that? And what does the user of an assistive technology need to know? They first off need to know that it is a button, and a screen reader will tell that. They need to know what that button's label is, because hopefully that label is going to be communicated to the user in a way that'll tell them what's going to happen when they click it. And then, of course, when they do click it, does it actually do something that a button should do? And these are really, really sort of, these seem like super basics, but we can extrapolate that to every sort of other user interface object on the screen: checkboxes, radio buttons, form fields, links, images, all that sort of stuff. If we think about what is this thing and what does it do, and we get the attendee at the training to think about that, that's when they walk away with real learning and the opportunity to answer those more complex questions themselves later on. And so this goes, so to circle back to Deborah's question about accessibility testing tools, one of the things that we see a lot of is that there's a disconnect between what a tool can do and should do versus what manual testing needs to do as well. And I'm actually writing a blog post on this topic now. I've been working on it for the last couple of days with respect to these tools that supposedly automatically fix things. Because with an automatic testing tool like Tenon, we have about 200 tests on Tenon, and those tests will cover about 3,000 failure conditions. And there's lots, so we can test for a lot of things, but there's a lot of things that can't be tested for at all, right? So captions, we can test for, in an HTML5 video, we can test for the track element, whether it has the captions type and all that sort of stuff, but we'd never be able to tell whether those captions are any good. With audio description, we'll never be able to, well, right now we cannot test for audio description, whether it exists or not, because it has to be part of the video. There's some cool things that we can do with creating audio description, but we still can't tell if they're any good. Focus management. With an automatic testing tool, if I trigger an event that causes a shift in focus, I'm probably changing the state of the page, and then it's a rabbit hole that you don't want to go. So there's a pile of things we can't test for. So therefore, we obviously can't automatically fix them. And then there's these things that we can test for automatically that we never know what to do to fix it. So a form field not having a label. If a form field doesn't have a label, we can test for that. but I can't tell you what that label needs to be with automatic means. And so, so this is the realm of manual testing and stuff like that, that I think we need to also be able to address. And unfortunately, lots of people think that automatic testing is enough. It's not. And we require manual testing. And also, to Deborah's point earlier, that even user testing is going to be important to ensure compliance, because ultimately, accessibility is not about compliance with the standard. WCAG is like a roadmap. It's not the destination.
And it's funny you should say it like that, because I have a lot of accessibility tool makers contact me. And I had this one company, and obviously I'm not going to name names. There's one company contacted me and they said, "Oh, you're going to be at this conference. We can't wait to show you how our accessibility tool will make a person 100% compliant to the laws in the United States, Section 508, and fully accessible. And all you have to do is put on this little, this little testing, this little overlay, and it's fully accessible." And so I thought, I was a little tiny bit skeptical. So I leave, and I'm at the conference, and they grab me after my session, and they have this big, beautiful booth behind them, and it says fully accessible, fully compliant, to the ADA, and anyway, and I won't even go why that is really a bad way to market your services, but okay. And they say, all you have to do is put on this little, tool,
little widget.
Little widget. Thank you. And you're fully accessible. And so I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. Yay. I'm so glad y'all done that. Now tell me, so this is fully accessible, and these corporations are going to be compliant in the United States, right? Yes. Okay, cool. And this company happens to not be from the United States, but that's okay. So I said, well, that's great. So how does this little widget make all the PDFs accessible that's on the website? Oh, no. We don't do those. Oh, okay. So now, how does it caption the videos? Just curious, because once again, to be 100% compliant, which we don't even know what that means. But anyway, everything has to be accessible. Oh, no, it doesn't. Okay, well, let me back up. What does it do? Well, the HTML code, all right, well, your sign right there, right behind you says that all they have to do is put this on their website and they're fully accessible. And I said, companies are going to get sued over this. And by the way, when companies get sued in the US and they worked with a vendor that said they're 100% compliant just by putting on this widget, they are going to come to you and you're going to get sued too. And we've had accessibility companies sued in the United States. Should we sue each other in the United States? That's a whole nother conversation. That's what we do. Too bad. But so that is what I think is really, really scary. It becomes buyer beware, because if you're saying it, you wouldn't say it if it wasn't true. And so I feel really sorry for the people that are trying to be compliant and follow the law in the United States, because they get not just in the US, it's happening all over the world, but they get such mixed information. And I know you've written about this a lot. And I know you've actually gotten attacked on social media over coming out and saying, come on, guys, this is not going to work. I've seen it. There's been some pretty vicious battles fought over this. So Karl.
I'm actually willing to go on the record saying I will openly debate any of the manufacturers of these tools. There have been many who had those same claims that you were talking about, who have since removed those claims, right?
Yes.
And so kudos to them for not overselling. There's still some who do, but this idea that we can just magically fix stuff is something that's pervasive throughout American society. Like just take this pill and all of a sudden you're going to get skinny. No, it doesn't go that way. Getting skinny, growing your hair back, fixing male performance problems. These don't happen overnight. They don't happen on their own. They're not automatically fixed. And the same thing goes for web accessibility. Are there things that you can fix? Yeah. We have a product called Mallet, that is intended to be deployed at the code level, like in your actual code repositories, that can fix a bunch of things. I think we fix about 14 different things, but they're super generic. Some of them require specific configuration, and ultimately the actual impact on the end user is minimal. So in other words, it's a volume play, right? We can fix, we can detect certain bad patterns. We can automatically understand what they should be doing instead, and then apply a code level fix. But even that is the real benefit of that is by fixing high volumes of issues at the code level. And we will never tell anybody that they're now fully compliant, because at that point they need to also run other automatic accessibility checks, fix those, and then do their manual testing. And we just can't oversell this. And I think there's a huge ethical problem with making claims that you can't support. And like I said, I'm glad to openly debate anybody who wants to do that. We'll do a CSUN session. Propose it. Right. I'll put my name on it, and we'll do a CSUN panel discussion about it.
And we'll do it here on AXSChat. We'd love to do that. We'd love to do the award-winning AXSChat. Sorry, I'm still floating about that award. Sorry, but also you made a very interesting point when you mentioned testing, and of course we consider, and I believe I can speak for you on this, Karl. We believe that the real quality user testing is when you are using individuals with disabilities and using assistive technology to test. Mm-hmm. So mm-hmm. that is a best practice. We continue to feel that way. And I think, once again, if you're a corporate brand and you're trying to be accessible and you're falling for, if anybody says they're going to make you 100% compliant, back away right away, especially mm-hmm. if you're a US brand, back away mm-hmm. because we don't know what that means to do that. The standards are changing and shifting. We're updating them. We can help you be accessible. We can help make sure that your customers have access to your technology. But if somebody's got the little easy button out that you're going to push in the US, yeah. Be careful because you are really, instead of reducing your compliance risk in the United States, you're actually upping your compliance list. And we've seen, this was really, Karl and I were both in this dogfight. And so once again, I'm not going to name any names, but y'all can, very easy to find stuff. But there was a vendor that was saying, you can totally make it 100% compliant, not a problem. Just put on this widget, you're done. And we got in a very open debate on LinkedIn about this. And I'm like, come on, don't cut off their head and put their head on a pillar and drag them through the city. But you're like, but Deborah, they've been doing this for 3.5 years. I'm like, yeah, but now they've learned. Well, I was naive because they didn't learn. They kept doing it. They're still doing it today. So, I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt. But the reality is, if you're not making your website, your mobile apps, your products, everything accessible, you are leaving out large numbers of people. Why would you? I'm a former programmer. I never wanted to program something that 15 to 20% of the population couldn't even use. It didn't even make any sense. Think of the money that you lose with that. So you're looking for the easy button, but if you're looking for a way to really make this part of your process, which is what accessibility is, just like privacy, just like security, just like good code, and it's part of it. It's part of it. So I don't want to. Antonio, let me turn it over to you. I know you have a comment to make.
No, let me pick up in what you're saying. You're saying, I don't want to build something that a percentage of users are able to use. But sometimes you actually design something that everybody can use, but it's ugly and you don't really want to be there. You don't even want, wow, what am I doing here? So that's the other dimension. We may have compliance, but then we end up stuck in building things that are compliance, are accessible.
Right.
But nobody wants to have there or enter in that house of experience. So how can we move on from this?
I just got back from Germany about 2 weeks ago, and I talked at the Beyond Tellerrand event. First off, kudos go out to Mark Deal, who handles Beyond Tellerrand. I had no idea he did it all himself. Yes, himself, he gets, you know, some assistance from others, but all the other crazy stuff around organizing an event, he does himself. And the great thing about Beyond Tellerrand that Mark told me was, he said, I always try to have at least one accessibility talk at all of my events. So he's had Marcy Sutton at Beyond Tellerrand, he's had Hayden Pickering, he's had me, and so that's really great. But it has a designery type focus, and so I decided to depart from my normal, you know, testing and development and code and, you know, hardcore shit. Excuse my language.
Excuse my French. Oh, sorry.
Presentations and go with the design type focus. And my message was that we don't really have to design stuff that's ugly to be accessible. And one of the slides I always like to show is the elevator at the Louvre. If you've ever been to the Louvre, what happens is you know, there's the pyramid thing made of glass, and everybody walks into the door there, and I believe they check your bags or whatever, and then you start going in, and there's a spiral staircase, and right next to the spiral staircase is the entry to an elevator. And the elevator is just a column, and it goes straight down. And that elevator is for people with wheelchairs. So, but they're right next to each other. They're literally right next to each other. So this is the stairs. This is the elevator. We both go in the same spot. The person who can walk down the stairs goes down the stairs, walks down the stairs, and then exits right next to their friend who was in the wheelchair at the same exact entry. And it's attractive. So there's all sorts of really cool stuff that's really attractive to look at, that's highly usable and accessible for everyone. I don't think we need to have something ugly. You know, I guess, sure, some people might think that high contrast is ugly. I think that's a really weird thing to say. But really, there's not a whole lot of things that impact design negatively when it comes to accessibility. And I would regard it as a lapse of creativity for someone who is unable to make something accessible and attractive.
I agree. And then also we know that there's some really amazing benefits from accessibility, like the SEO benefits and other benefits. And one thing that we talk a lot about on AXSChat is we talk about how something was built for one segment of the people with disabilities in many cases, that are now benefiting all of society, like captioning or curb cuts or speech to text. I mean, there is just, and, you know, so go ahead, and then I will turn it back over to Antonio that has a question. But Karl, you go first.
Yeah, you know, you've talked, and I know this is a topic that obviously interests you from a business perspective, is we talk a lot about this ROI on accessibility. And there's a great guy I met in Canada named Richard Donovan, who has a really great presentation on the business case of accessibility. And his argument is that if we're able to, like, it's almost like a cycle. If we increase the employment level of people with disabilities, we increase the amount of capital entering the market. The amount of capital entering into the market provides the ROI. We also again increase the employment opportunities. We increase the ROI. It's a really amazing presentation that he did. And so, yeah, the thing that's missing though from a lot of this stuff is the marketing, right? So you cannot just build it and have somebody come. Like, if anybody has ever tried to start a business, any kind of business, and just say, hey, look how awesome it is. Because we made that mistake with Tenon, actually. Look, Tenon is great. And then we expected people to flock to it. That's never going to work. So, but if you make your stuff accessible and then market the crap out of it,
yes,
that's going to, you know, now that additional 20% of the U.S. population that you talked about is going to be flocking to you. And that's the great thing is, you know, if you think about how marketing people measure their successes, like of a marketing campaign, sometimes big companies will measure marketing ROI on fractions of a percent. Think about increasing your overall market penetration by making your stuff accessible and then marketing the crap out of that to people with disabilities, and the market penetration that you could have from that. That's the one thing I want to mention when it comes to ROI.
Antonio?
When we know that there are a good number of organizations who have a good level of influence at the enterprise. We know that research and advisory companies like Forrester and Gartner they can have an interesting or constellation, and they can have a very interesting impact in the way how decision makers decide what they're going to do next. How can we find ways to make sure that this type of organizations are able to start looking at accessibility with more attention as part of the roadmap in the context of a customer experience and user experience?
I think I had a conversation one time with Rob Unitas, who was the founder of High Software, and I think he's since moved on to focusing on privacy and stuff like that. But one of the things that I thought was interesting, when I was doing a presentation on selling accessibility, and he said, "What about CSR, corporate social responsibility? Like, can we actually get attention with others through this idea of corporate social responsibility?" We know that companies market around their environmental friendliness. We know that they market heavily around diversity and all that sort of stuff. Getting them to market around disability and improving access to people with disabilities is probably a pretty interesting thing. And after that, and after that, you can see executives probably start paying attention to that sort of thing. And getting the executive buy-in, as you were alluding to, Antonio, is a really important thing. Publicity around CSR is going to be a big deal because other executives will see that. People are competitive in nature. If they see that, they'll be able they'll get a reaction to it, like, I want to do that too. Or
it is. Yeah, and it's very exciting. And I will do that is what I talked about in my new book, Inclusion Branding. I talked about how corporate brands have the opportunity to improve their CSR and their social impact, which we all expect, especially the millennials. There's study after study after study saying that millennials don't want to work for a company that's not having social impact. They will pay more money to do business with a company that they perceive as a better brand. This is very important to corporations and only getting more important. Also, as more of us are aging and acquiring disabilities, my husband now has several disabilities. Didn't when he was younger. Both of my parents had disabilities. They're now, deceased. So this is a growing market. It's getting bigger. And then you tie in all this AI and robotics and all this really cool stuff that's happening. If things are inaccessible, we're going to get a bigger digital divide, and it's going to get worse. And so, and I know that we're out of time. So I want to do a couple of things. First of all, thank you to Barclays for supporting AXSChat. We really are grateful to them. They really help us make sure we're fully accessible and walking the walk. But also, before we go, Karl, we want to give you the opportunity to tell people how to find out about Tenon. The thing that I like about Tenon is I like that you are an expert in the field. I like that you've worked with many of these other major organizations that are so great. I like that you look at this from a global perspective. I like that you understand what tools can and cannot do. There's a lot that you bring to the table, not to mention you're part of the Viking and the Lumberjack team, where you're trying to make accessibility fun and cool and sassy. But tell our audience how to find out more about you, Karl, and Tenon.
Sure. So the website, tenon.io, super easy to find. You can Google me. My website's Karl Groves. My social media presence is always named Karl Groves everywhere. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Mastodon, all of those sorts of things. I'm Karl Groves on all of those things. And so you can tweet at me at Karl Groves. I keep my DMs open. People can message me at any time. I'm also on A11Y Slack there as well. Super easy to find. So you can get in touch with me that way. And also the official Twitter for Tenon is at Tenon API, TENON API.
And of course, he's going to have his team tweeting and joining the conversation. And as a reminder, Karl is Karl with a K. So Karl Groves, Karl Groves. And I've known Karl a long time, and I'm really proud of what he's doing. And I think he is one of the real authentic people in our industry. He wants to have impact. Well, that's what I think. So, so thank you again to Barclays. Thank you to Karl. Thank you to Antonio and Neil, and the award-winning AXSChat. Thanks to the entire community. We all did this together. Yes. So bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.